Howdy folks, welcome back to Doing Brew.
This is video 4 of
Our kitchen remodel, and as you can see behind me, there's quite a bit of work that's already been done. This stud wall has now been removed, and you'll see the process in which I removed it. I've already installed a new stud here, pretty much at the location of an existing stud, but that stud in this 70-year-old house was warped and twisted. So I went ahead and knocked that out to put in a true plumb stud that'll work nicely for the termination of our stud wall here, leaving this whole area open to the dining room and the dining room into the kitchen. Below there's going to be a knee wall. It'll probably be about 33 3/4 inches, and that'll form the back wall for the row of cabinets that will go here with a nice peninsula countertop.
And of course, we need to finish up on all of the electrical work that we started in video 3. Essentially, we'll end up rewiring this entire kitchen.
In here, Alex has nearly finished all of the insulation, standard Owens Corning 2x4 stud wall insulation, which is faced to provide that vapor barrier. This insulation is going to make a marked improvement in the comfort of the kitchen, because previously, as you see here, there was no insulation whatsoever, which in my part of the country, the Middle Eastern seaboard, I find that all the time in homes built before the 1970s. There's no insulation in exterior walls. Okay, so that's what you're going to see in day 4. So let's go ahead, get to work.
And the first thing that I'm going to address today is the relocation of these two switches. The dimmer switch is for the kitchen lights, and the toggle switch is for the utility room. Now this is inside the kitchen, which I guess kind of makes sense, because that's where you need the light switch for the kitchen. But I really think it makes more sense to have the switch just outside of the kitchen. And so I'm going to place it on the dining room wall so that you can turn the lights on as you enter the kitchen. And of course, before we begin any electrical work, we have to secure all the circuit breakers feeding power to the circuits we're going to be working on. Now, the first thing I have to do, remove the faceplate. And I'm going to take out each of the two switches, and then we'll assess what we need to do. And as it turns out, I don't have enough existing wire, home wire here, to just move these two wire runs and switches to the other wall. So I'm going to have to hook up a junction box. You'll see that here in just a moment. And as I get each of the switches disconnected, I'm going to mark each wire pair so I know which lights they service. Now, as you'll see, these tags fall off as I pull wires through the wall, but it's important to keep track of which wires you're working with so that you get the right hookup in the end. And next up, I will remove the staples that are securing these wire runs to the studs inside the stud cavity. Just pop those out with a nail puller or cat's paw. And once those wires are free, I'm going to work them up to just above the door jamb for the walk-through into the utility room. And that's going to be where I build out my junction box. And building out the junction box by pulling the old wires into the box. And then I will temporarily tuck that box up over the door jamb while I pull the new wires through. Of course, I'll need 2 pairs of wires, one for each switch, one kitchen and one utility room switch. Now there's really nothing terribly complicated with this. You're just pulling wire through the holes you drilled, through the studs, and then pulling them through, leaving wire at the end where your switch box will be, and leaving plenty of wire up where your junction box will be so you can do that final connection. Now that I have those new wires pulled, I'm going to go ahead, pull them into the junction box, and make our connections. And this is about as easy as it gets. Black to black and white to white, and then tie all the ground wires together. Your ground wires are always going to be the copper wire that doesn't have any kind of plastic sheathing around it, or sometimes it'll be a green wire. Now you'll notice that I put the wire caps or wire nuts on the wires, and also note that when I twist the wires here, as you can see, I'm twisting them to the right. Basically, that makes threads for your wire nut to securely attach to the wires, and thereby locking them together pretty much forever. Now, just for a little bit of added security, I like to add some electrical tape to those wire nuts to make sure that there's no way they're ever going to back off. Now I just need to clean everything up, tuck it into the junction box. Now I'm just neatening up the wires here heading to our switch box, and as you saw before, I'm going to attach these wires to the studs with a couple of electrical staples, which you just hammer in. Now, important to note, we're not hammering this in like we're building a deck. You're just tapping these in until they're snug on the wire. The intent here is to prevent the wires from moving around in the stud cavity, not to make it a permanent part of the structure, so to speak. So be careful. You don't want to split the insulation on those wires, then you got to rewire everything. Hey, now I'm marking my location for the switch box and installing it. Opening up the access ports in the back, pulling my new wire through, one for the kitchen, one for the utility room. Of course, we're not going to complete the install of these because we still have drywall to do. So I'll neatly tuck the wires up into the box, and they are ready to go for drywall. Next up, a safety precaution, but also a code requirement. Alex is going to install metal strike plates over all of the holes where our electrical lines pass through. Whether these are existing holes in the studs or new ones that we drilled, you got to put a strike plate over to ensure that no screws from drywall, no screws from cabinet installation or picture hanging, anything like that, goes through the drywall, through the stud, and punctures your electrical line. Now, a quick overview regarding the installation of insulation. This is fiberglass insulation with a vapor barrier, sized to fit between 16-inch on-center stud cavities. This is R13 value insulation. Of course, you cut your insulation to length, and then you fit the top portion into the stud cavity and secure all the way across the top with staples. Next, I go down about 18 to 24 inches to secure the next section. Now you do have to be kind of careful here, because if you pull way over to one side or the other and staple it, that offset is going to make it nearly impossible to attach at the bottom, because you're not going to have any paper, any vapor barrier on either the left or the right side, whichever side you pull over to complete the installation. So you just need to work slowly and methodically in small sections, get it secured, and then go back and re-staple all the way along. And I like to put my staples maybe about every 4 or 5 inches. Of course, this is really going to be held in place by the drywall, but I want to make sure it's not going to move around at all, and it's nice and secure before the drywall is installed. Okay, now on to removing this old stud wall to make room for our peninsula countertop. Now I could just use a hammer and beat the daylights out of these little stud members, but I prefer to use a reciprocating saw with a metal blade and cutting those nails. That way the block just simply comes out and I'm not wailing on things with a hammer. This is a lot cleaner, more controlled. My preferred way of removing the top portion of this stud wall. Now down on the lower portion of the stud wall where I have a lot of nail heads visible, just back to the tried and true method of using a crowbar or a pry bar to ease those nails out. Okay, now I have to address this HVAC ducting. I am pretty fortunate that there's a ceiling duct about 2 feet behind me in the kitchen, one right around the corner in the living room, and then a second in the dining room. So for this case, I'm just going to eliminate this ducting altogether. So with that 90-degree ducting removed, now I need to address capping off that small bit of ductwork. The ducting runs through a 2x4 stud wall, so the ducting is appropriately sized for a 2x4. So I used a 2x4 and some scrap metal that I harvested from the old ductwork to build my own cap. Just by hammering it over the edges of a 2x4, it made a perfect cap, and it really only took me about 5 minutes. Now I'm going to put that cap in place and secure it with some self-tapping sheet metal screws.
Exterior stud cavity.
And that's all there is to it.
But up here, there's this tiny space here which allows for warm airflow from the ceiling of an addition, which is a utility room. So we want to seal that off too, because a lot of hot air is just pouring down in from this space, and if we allow that just to fill these stud cavities, that's got to have a detrimental effect on the ability to heat and cool the space. So what we're going to do is we're going to install a 2x4 stud about a third of the way down the wall, and then insulate that whole space.
This is a really simple task to knock out. Just cut the 2x4 to the stud cavity width and just put it into place. Sometimes these are called fire breaks, because what they do is they prevent fire from being able to get into a stud cavity and go up to the next floor. Of course, we're not using it for that purpose. We're using it as kind of an air brake that we can insulate down to ensure the space is as well insulated as it can be. Next up, Alex will complete the installation of the R13 insulation. And here's a quick look at the completed insulation install. Nice, neat work. Really like it. Well, that's all for this video, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was informative. Coming up in video 5, we'll finish out on framing our overhead. And then we'll frame up and install the knee wall, which will be the back of the cabinets and help support the peninsula countertop. And then we'll finish up on a little bit of electrical, specifically the power runs for the lights over the peninsula. And then we'll do just a little bit of cleanup work, because after video 5 comes drywall install, and the kitchen really starts coming together. And that completes us for today, folks. Thanks a lot for watching this episode of Do and Brew. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments or send me an email. Email address is in the video description. See you back here next time on Do and Brew, folks. Take care.